But I'll still walk away sometimes going, I don't know if that was truthful enough for me.
We all have that. We all have an instinct. We know when someone's going through something. Are you okay? I didn't say I wasn't. Why are you? It's because your behavior.
It's the trick is figuring out, they're always revealing something. Humans are always revealing something about themselves.
It's a double-edged sword, honestly, to be in any sort of artistic or creative field.
We as... it's all right. Is it fixed?
Welcome to the In the Moment podcast, episode 9. We have Adam Hagenbuch. Welcome.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to applaud myself.
I love that. I'm going to do it with you.
Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much, man. Yeah, seriously, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Full disclosure, we just met here recently.
Yes.
But we've both been acting for, I think, maybe around the same time. I started acting like in high school.
Yeah.
In around 2008.
Yeah.
In North Texas, which I feel like you did too.
Yep, same. I grew up in Dallas, Plano, and went to a little private Christian school in Addison. And I started acting. I mean, I guess I was doing like school plays. You could only do them once it was in high school. Mm-hmm. But I started acting before then because I was so abysmal at sports, which, as you know, in North Texas, in all of Texas, it's very important to be good at sports.
It is.
And I was not. So I think in an effort to find something I was good at, my mom put me in an acting class. I don't know what year that would have been. I was, I think 8. I think it was 4th grade.
Okay.
And one by one, it was just me and like 12 girls, and all of the girls left the class. So the teacher prorated the class and let me have another one. So it was actually a bargain that got me into acting. It was saving money that got me into acting. Can you imagine?
I can.
How the tables have turned.
You really have. Wow. So you weren't able to do plays until high school, though.
Yeah.
Right. And what was the first play that you were in, and what was that experience like?
We did have plays in middle school.
Okay.
But they were like, I did one in middle school. We had one in lower school in like 4th grade, 5th grade, 4th through 1st grade. But it was like a musical thing, and everybody just sang. It was more like choir. Mm-hmm. So the first real play I did was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in 6th grade, I think. And I played Edmund. Sold out my family for Turkish Delight. Not much has changed. I still love Turkish Delight. That was like, I think the first time I got an applause. And really what surprised me is it was the first time people laughed at something I did. I didn't know why. I remember talking to my mom afterward, and I was like, why were people laughing? And she was like, 'cause you're funny. And I was like they're laughing at me or with me. And I think that was the beginning of being like, does the delineation matter? The laughter, the applause is so enjoyable. When you're on stage, it doesn't matter if they're laughing at you, you know?
No, you're moving them in some way.
Yeah.
And that experience, when you got to high school, did it start to become something that you took a little, even more, like a deeper step into?
Yeah. I was primarily interested in things that would make people laugh. So like I stayed in those acting classes, and then eventually that teacher, I can't remember her name now, but she only taught a few classes for kids, and then there were just adult classes, which I wasn't allowed to take yet. And I was also so like horribly dyslexic and ADHD that I didn't really want to memorize more material. So she was like, well, there's another type of class you can take where you don't have to know lines, called improv. So I was doing a lot of improv classes. I was in an adult improv class where I went to a mall and did improv. I can't remember which mall. I think it's gone now. And so I just loved that I could get people to laugh at things, and that they weren't just laughing at me. It was sort of like a shared thing. And so I was really interested in just being funny, being like the class clown, and stage was sort of like it was like a heightened opportunity for that. Until I think my junior year, and I was working on Our Town, and I was like, there's no laughs to milk out of this. This is a serious play. I was playing George, not Gibbs. Is that his last name? George Gibbs?
I can't remember. It's a Thornton Wilder, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think, and then my wife Emily died at the end of the play. You know, she has a great monologue where she says, "Does anyone ever really truly appreciate what we have here?" And then the stage manager says, "Maybe the poets, maybe the painters." Right? Really great. I mean, really fantastic stuff to be working on as a junior, as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old.
Yeah.
And then my character's supposed to cry, which I thought was like I was like, that's a really important thing to be able to do. So that was the first time I started really investing in like how to do these things. I knew how to create an effect of making people laugh, which is a skill in its own right, you know?
Definitely.
Or I knew how to work to milk a laugh out of something, but I wasn't sure. I didn't know how to create these effects in myself. You know, I didn't know I could indicate an effect of something, right? I could indicate a sort of sadness, or I could indicate a sort of upset or anger or things like that. I knew how to create a convincing facsimile, but I didn't know how to actually convince myself, which I thought was the more important thing. When I started taking it seriously, I remember I would do like monologues, or I would rehearse something, and my mom would be like, "I thought it was great," you know? And I was like, "But I didn't believe it. I know I'm lying to you right now." So, and sure, it's my mom. She's going to believe anything I do.
Right.
And maybe I can get some portion of the audience to believe me, but I'll know that I'm faking. You know, I'll know that I'm not really there. And that bothered me. It drove me nuts. And it drove me nuts that no one seemed to care. They were like, if you can fool them, why does it matter? You know?
Yes.
So I think that really started my journey into real acting. I think, you know, like what is this thing that I'm doing? I'm not just saying lines. I'm not just trying to get through the play. You know, I'm not just doing the actions the thing says. There's some other deeper thing going on. I just started reading every book I could find. I read Uta Hagen's Respect for Acting, and then A Challenge for the Actor. And that's where I started. And that was, you know, the first ideas of like a substitution and endowment and all those sorts of things. And that's when I really fell in love with it, I think, was my junior year.
And do you remember having that specific thought back then about, man, I really want to convince myself of this?
Yeah. Wow. It would drive me nuts it still does. It's an ongoing thing. It's like an unresolvable problem, I think, that I have to, if I don't feel like I'm affected in some way, right? It doesn't have to be, I think one of the things that's changed for me in my acting is that I no longer feel like it has to be the exact thing the character is going through at that moment, because that's a bit of a fallacy anyways, right? Like, what if you're dying? You're not actually not gonna work on a substitution for a heart attack, you know? How
dedicated are you?
Well, you're right. I should quit if I'm not willing to die on stage. But I still struggle with, that's still a struggle for me, actually, is how do I find something that has an effect on me, right? Right, it's living truthfully in the imaginary circumstances for myself. But I'll still walk away sometimes going, I don't know if that was truthful enough for me, right? Even if it did have a desired effect, or even if it did carry out the playwright or the author's intention, or reveal something about the play, which is what I think is the essence of acting, is, you know, a revelation of something about a character, I'll still find myself dissatisfied unless I feel fully convinced by it. But that's, I think, its own trap too sometimes, you know.
It definitely can be. I think what you're saying though made a lot of sense. I think that someone had said to me once, the truth has a different ring to it. Mm-hmm. You know, when you walk into a room and someone, maybe you're going to dinner with a couple or something, and you walk in and you can tell they've been fighting.
Yes.
And they're trying to, hey, oh my God. Mm-hmm. And you're like, something's off. It's because we all have that. We all have an instinct
Yes.
for something real, something false. We know when someone's going through something. Are you okay?
Yeah.
I didn't say I wasn't. Why are you? It's because your behavior.
Right.
Like, there's something off. I can sense it.
Yeah.
And instinct being kind of without conscious thought. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like toss a ball to you or to someone who knows something about sports.
Right.
They would respond and I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Not me.
No, but you would respond to that. You know, we're having a conversation that's like instinctual.
Yeah.
We know when to listen, when to respond. We know, oh, I want to share this.
Right.
You know, and I think that's really the key. And what my teacher did for me ultimately was like, because I was in the same boat where I was just kind of out to sea and going, I really want to do this. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get to the level where I watch a performance that is so good. And I'm like, I can't do that. But I'm around acting, reading about it in classes, on set, on stage.
Yeah.
And I'm going, it's just not there. And what he said to me ultimately was like, we have to get it to the point where it is instinctual.
Yes.
You have to really be responding truthfully.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, how?
Yeah.
And that's when for him in his class, it was so much influenced by Sanford Meisner. Mm-hmm. And so I had one teacher in New York that was taught by Sanford Meisner, had him for like a semester at a conservatory. He was one of the only teachers at that time where things were starting to click.
Yeah.
And he and then my teacher kind of followed this up years later when I was in his class with the foundation of acting is the reality of doing. And I was like, okay, what do we mean by that?
Yeah.
And looking at Sanford Meisner, and I think people get caught up into, I'm a Meisner guy, or I'm only a method actor, or Strasberg or whatever. It really, they're all trying to get to the same thing, I think, and they're all trying to get to, it's something convincing, something real, something believable. He said he based everything that he taught off of what he already knew about life.
Yeah.
He would study life and behavior and emotion. And of course, this was influenced so much by Clairmont and Strasberg and Sheila Crawford in the group theater, but he found a way to codify and simplify it even more for his students. In his class, I think Udo Hagen was trying to do the same, Stella Adler the same, so many other teachers. And when he said, you're always doing something. And then he said, don't just take my word for it, go research that yourself and be skeptical about it. And I would just observe people and myself, and I would go, oh yeah, people are always doing something. Yeah. Sometimes it's not as high stakes as a film or a play, but they're doing something. Yeah. And then hearing someone else talk about writing and basing the principles of writing off of what was already true about life and saying something like, people are always doing something and they're always changing. Only even a dead body's decomposing, that type of thing. It was like, oh wow, I guess there is always a state of change, and that's a result of conflict, which means two people are trying to do something. Yeah. And maybe they have the same goal or they have opposing ones, and that creates conflict, which I guess constitutes a narrative in which we're trying to bring it to life. And he said, emotion is a byproduct of what you do. And that kind of clicked for me. I was like, okay, wait, let me test that in life. Someone cuts me off in traffic, I have a response, right? Or I get a call, I'm disappointed. Right. Or whatever. I'm answering it, I'm listening, I'm invested. And then it was like, how can you find a way to invest yourself? Because right now, we all have instincts, imagination, and emotions, and many things. But those three pillars, if we can access those things, it will bring out what Meisner called your actor's faith, your ability to believe or convince yourself of what is imaginary. Yeah. And that was the system or whatever that he had created, and that my teacher was kind of carrying the torch of.
That's so interesting. Actor's faith. I've never heard that before. I study with a teacher as well, and he's Strasberg trained. Wow. And it's such a fascinating thing. And I'm such an acting nerd as you are as well. Yes. That I love the distinctions between the techniques and what they're all meant to do. But I have to constantly remind myself that even with like the vocabulary and all these things that are fun and the sort of insular nature that those things can get, that can be so tedious, but also everybody sort of indulges in that a little bit. I learned from this person. Yeah. That it's like, well, they all came from the same place. Like, these are all just extrapolations of these few. It's all really from Stanislavski, and then really from like whoever Stanislavski and who is it, Denchenko, his students were, whoever they studied.
Boleslavsky and Uspensky and
exactly.
Over here,
and it was a bunch of Russians, and then like a handful of foreign actors, mostly Eleonora Duse, that they were like these people seem to get it. But though everyone they learned from was self-taught, and they were self-taught from their humanity, and some accumulation of other intrinsic artistic interests, right?
Absolutely.
Dance and singing and other forms of like human artistic vocabulary. But they were really just finding something within themselves. And it's a hard thing because I don't know, I'm sure other people in other artistic mediums feel the same way. But it's this push and pull of like, well, I want to study and I want to learn more. And I want to learn it in a codified way where I can gauge my growth in some way, right?
Yes.
And so like a class and a technique can provide me that. It can provide me a series of tools, and it can provide me, certainly if it's in a class or with a teacher, some sort of framework for growth and some sort of rubric. But then I also need to be pushing past this in some way and exploring for myself and seeing how this applies. So it's a constant, like, I don't know, maybe this is making it sound too sophisticated, but you're sort of constantly like Da Vinciing yourself into like building the flying machine and then testing it out. And you have to see, what really works for you. And for me, I always find it to be like I look at these actors and these performances that I love, Al Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon, or, these amazing, you're like, how did they do that? And I'm like, okay, so I knew he was at the Actors Studio at the time. He was studying under Strasberg. I can venture to guess he was using an effective memory or something for these things, right? But then he's also, it's idiosyncratic to him. He's doing something that's for him, that's unique, that probably doesn't really have a name. And so as applicable as all these sort of little terminologies are, there's also just, there's sort of your nerve to just be willing to try something for yourself. And that's a hard thing because I want the safety of knowing I'm doing it the right way. That's a constant, struggle. And it's a funny thing because like we're talking about, it's always like a first question when you meet another actor, like, what got you into it? What was your first play? And I like to think that's like such a long time ago, but I deal with the same exact struggles I dealt with then all the time. It's still like, I believe myself? Do I have a sense of actor's faith? Like I had never heard that term before. That's great.
Yeah, you're so right. And I thought that was really, really well said, actually, and really, really, I think describes and paints the picture of what it is to be a real actor who's trying to be creative, trying to be an artist in some way. And that's, I think, why out of all of the teachers that really popularized American acting, or at least the study of it, Meisner, I'm drawn to him so much, I think, because part of his philosophy was you need to train to the point where no one is really acting the way you are. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of antithetical to a lot of the systems or the methods in place, because they're like, nope, my way or the highway. Yeah. And it's tough probably for someone who studied it their whole life to be like, stop veering out of, I dedicated my whole life, and now you, my pupil, are going outside of the bound. And it's like, you kind of have to have the humility to understand that it isn't yours. Right. It's an artist. And I think it's why you're seeing, like you said, the actors that didn't have a theater to go to or a company to go to or a teacher to study with. And I think there's a ton listening now that don't. Yeah. But broke through, like you said, Duza, and even people like Richard Mansfield and so many others that they're just like looking around and going, how do I make this real for myself and for the audience? That's a tale as old as time for actors. Look at Joaquin Phoenix, never had an acting class, or Tommy Lee Jones either. Yeah. And you get kind of mad. You watch people like that. You're just like, whatever, man. Like, but that would have to prove, and of course they are outliers, I think, to most acting journeys. But if that's true, then there must be something true about the fact that you can find it within yourself. Yeah. To instinctively respond to the life across from you, and to within a certain context of a scenario go, my character wants that. Yeah. I'm going to go try to get that. Yeah. And if this person steps in front of me, I'm going to be like, get out of my way, or I'm going to say, what's going on? Yeah. I'm going to respond like a person would. Right. And my teacher told me, I tried to find the quote. I was like, who quoted that? What's this quote from? I was teaching a workshop. I texted him right beforehand because it was the quote of the week. Mm-hmm. And he was like, he's really humble. So he was like, I was like, is this your quote? And he was like, I can't place who that is. It's got to be someone. I'm like, it's you. It's you.
You came up with this, yeah.
We actually gave him, at the end of our training, we gave him a book of his own quotes.
Oh, wow.
Because he had some great, just awesome insights. And it was like Jim Perrick on acting. He still has it. It was great.
Yeah.
But I was like, I think this is your quote. I'm crediting you from now on. But he said, you use your technique for before you act. You use your humanity while you act. And I loved that because, and Meisner said, technique is a means to an end.
Right.
It doesn't matter who you study with. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you can get to where you can live truthfully under imaginary circumstances. Yeah. However you can do that, do it. And for my students, that's always my goal. I'm like, I'm trying to help you become an artist, which means if something's not working, don't do it. Yeah. Ignore what I say and try something that might work for you. And if it does work, obviously keep it and keep going. But this is not the Adam Lowder technique. This is not, frankly, in all due respect, Sanford Meisner's dead. Yeah. I can't just keep touting the Meisner approach. It's like, technique. He's not here to speak for himself. We have what he left behind, but at the same time, we have to find a way to I think, inspire others to be what he was also saying, which is like themselves. Yeah. Artistically. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at all of those teachers, it's like it's so funny because it started with, it was Strasberg, and it was like I keep touching the microphone. The Strasberg, the system, right? And then it was like, or not Stanislavski. Yes. It was the Stanislavski system, which is like, then you can see how that was extrapolated into the method. And then Stella Adler, it was like, well, I'm going to go study with the real one and get the real one. And Meisner and the group theater and Harold Klerman and everybody, but they were all making their own thing out of something before. So if you're really studying them all, you have to see that creating your own thing is actually what they were teaching. Correct. Right? They were each, the one before, that was even what Stanislavski did, is he was like, I can see what Eleonora Duse is doing. He couldn't do it himself. He was not as good of an actress as she was. But he can go, I can see what she's doing, I can hear what she's describing, and maybe I can take some of these things and systematize them, and maybe you can do them. But all he was really doing was writing down what somebody else was innately doing. And I think of my teacher always recommends the book Acting the First 6 Lessons by Richard Boleslavsky. And fantastic. He always says, he's like, I know you all think you're on to like lessons 6 through 20, but he's like, actually you're on -6 through 0. So then you can maybe start at 1 through 6. And his big point is he writes it in this sort of narrative structure like Stanislavski did, where it's like 2 characters. So they thought it'd be more compelling. And he names the character who's like the actress, the student, the creature. And he's like, why does he call her the creature? And it's like, because she's fantasy, she's made up. She's like a creature. She comes like an animal with just instincts intact, ready to receive and ready to do things. And you don't come that way. You come with all these foibles and these preconditions and these habits. And so I think it is often just like, okay, well, you have all these things, but if you can just do it, do it, right? Like another thing my teacher talks about is when we prescribe medicine to someone, when we prescribe an antibiotic, let's say, for a viral infection. Or is that right? No, antibiotic is for a bacteria. But when you prescribe one, which one do you use? Do you cut right to the super high-end one that's going to wipe out your entire digestive tract? Or do you start with maybe a Z-Pack, right? And the doctor will always prescribe, if they're good, the lowest dose of something. And a technique should be the same way. You don't need to roll out and use every single tool under the tree. You just need to just do something that will work. Yeah. But it can feel that way because I think another thing, again, I love this concept of faith, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking about that with Meisner. Because it's so hard to have faith in ourselves as actors, as people, I guess, really on a more philosophical sense. Mm-hmm. But to actually go, is what I'm doing enough, right? Can I have trust that something I'm doing here will be seen and understood by people, right? I know it's maybe, and I think the key to that is being personal, having it be the more intimate and the more personal it can be.
the more you can trust that someone will understand it or not understand it, but be affected by it. But that is so hard because I think for myself, I know the more personal things I work on, the more intimate something is, the more I start to lose trust, the more I want to, gild the lily or put something on it to make people understand it. Usually because I want to be understood in the exact way I want people to understand me. I don't want to be misunderstood in any slightest way. The more personal I get, the more I'm like, it's this. But that's, when it's really broad and I'm doing whatever, I'm like, you can think of me however you want. But the more I'm really putting something on the line, the more I'm like, if they don't see me this way about this thing, then I don't know what to think of myself. I don't know what they'll, God forbid they might momentarily misinterpret me as that character, which is what the whole thing I'm trying to do.
That's amazing. It is quite a paradox. Have you heard this quote? This quote blew my mind. I've shared it before, but it was about, it was from this child psychologist in the UK. His name was D.W. Winnicott. And one of my students, actually one of the last guests, Ashton, he shared it with me. But he said that artists are driven by the tension between the desire to hide and the desire to communicate.
It's really good.
And I remember being like, class is over. I'm done. I don't want to leave me alone. Because it just felt very exposing.
Yeah.
Because I had never heard someone sum it up quite right. Because I always live in that tension.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to make an offering.
Yes.
And yet, I hope you know what I mean. And also, I didn't write it. It's the character.
That's so funny because as actors, we always have that out. It's at any moment you can be like, it's the character, not me. I would never do that thing. And I used to revel in that feeling. I used to just love that I was like, it's the mask, right? It's the Greek masks. I can cover my face and I don't have to, but I think there's something real to that. Psychologically, I think we need to allow ourselves space to have some distance from the character we think of ourselves. Our ego needs that sometimes. I think we're so fixated on our own character and how it would change or be different if we happen to do this thing. What would it mean about me? And so I think acting can be wonderful for that, to sometimes go, well, okay, calm down, ego. It's not you doing this, even though it is, right? But it can give you the space to take a risk to do something that you might not otherwise allow yourself to do because it doesn't fit your character, right? It doesn't fit the character of Adam. Our names are both Adam, so that's easy.
Yeah, perfectly applicable.
But it won't fit, but then you might do that thing, or I'm sure everybody's familiar, anybody who's an actor who's done a piece of theater or a role that they loved is familiar with the feeling of going, oh, I never knew that about myself. Mm-hmm. I can't believe I did that thing and I didn't know I could do that, right? And it might change nothing about your life. You might go back to living the exact same life afterward, but you'll know you can do that thing. You'll know you can say that thing, right? And so it's always a nice out, but I think for me, the more I can embrace it, I'm like, I really wanted to do that. That's why I did that thing. Yeah. Even if the character is evil, or if it's Iago and Othello and I hate them more and all these sorts of things, and you're going, okay, but some part of me wanted to play this character, and I'm saying these lines. So it's
so often there's an instinctual pursuit for some reason, and oftentimes you can't put it into words. And I think society, people, art, we're all kind of trying to find the blend between structure and freedom. And it's like, I want to be able to say, like you said, exactly what I mean so that you really get it. Yeah. And if you don't get it, I'll explain it a different way.
Yeah.
And I think you've produced work on your own as well. Yeah. I've produced a few films and stuff, and I'm talking to directors at times, and sometimes that director is the writer, is the producer, and you're kind of helping them along in their independent film or whatever. And it's so funny because you kind of get to the same thing. What's your conviction?
Yeah.
What are you and it doesn't have to be a statement or a theme or a premise. It can be a question. It can be an exploration. It can be an emotion. I don't know what it is, but what is it that you're trying to express or communicate in some way? And they'll be like, I can't put it into words.
Right.
And I'm like, if you could, you wouldn't make a film.
Right.
If you could, you wouldn't play a part.
Yeah.
I really want to say or express something, and I don't know quite what it is, but there's something about Iago that is saying it, you know, in a way. And I think going back to this, I read Elia Kazan is my favorite director.
Fantastic.
I read a lot of his books and stuff, and his autobiography, A Life. He was in his late 30s, and he was with a psychoanalyst, and the psychoanalyst was really bold and was talking about his work and was like, why'd you direct that thing? And he's like, what? And he starts answering the questions. Oh, my wife gave it to me, and I thought it was good. And he's like, why'd you direct that? And then he'd give a reason. And he said, you never direct anything for you. And Kazan, he's being very transparent. He's like, I was getting kind of pissed off at this guy.
Right.
And he's like, you need to make things for you. And he's like, well, Molly always says, his wife at the time always says I can direct the phone book. So I'm like, people always give me stuff and I love it and I see the value in it and I'm good at seeing potential. So I want to bring that out. And he said, yeah, but you're not working personally enough. And he's like, who does this guy think he is? You're not here to analyze my work, dude.
Right.
I've got Oscars and Tonys and I don't need you. And he's like, well, you need to know, Mr. Kazan, it's what's most personal is most universal. Yeah. And he said everything kind of clicked for him after that. And it made him want to make different movies that he hadn't made at that point in time, or direct different plays. He started writing novels and stuff after that. Do you
know what point that was in his sort of filmography or directology?
It was right around the HUAC testimony time in 52.
Oh, yeah.
So he had just made Man on a Tightrope in 53.
Okay.
And then, which was released in 53, but then, with the House Un-American Activities Committee looking for communists and him coming out and naming names and all these things created quite a controversy. And he wrote an op-ed piece the next day and said, we should all do this because this ideology is wrong. And I was wrong, and let's come out and do it. Yeah. Everybody was like, really not your friend anymore. Yeah. And so people would like pass him on the street. People that used to like love him and he would be like, oh, I don't want to be associated. I mean, Arthur Miller was his best friend.
I know.
Didn't talk to him for years until they did After the Fall at Lincoln Rep.
Oh, I didn't know they ever even reconciled.
They did. Thankfully, because, friendships, it sucks when they fall apart. But he said, no movies before my testimony are worth watching.
Wow.
He said, they're not real. They're not from me. And so On the Waterfront is really the first one that's from him. Oh, wow.
Well, you can see the change then.
You can. And there's a great book that is a series of interviews with Kazan and Jeff Young, a journalist it's called Kazan, the Master Director, Discusses His Films. And I like to read it sort of like I watch a movie and read a chapter. And the On the Waterfront chapter is over 100 pages. and Jeff Young is great because he really asks him tough questions. And Kazan's very honest, which is why I love reading his stuff. Even at the disparaging of his own character. He's like, I don't care, that's how I was. That's what I was doing.
Right.
And if you read his autobiography, you realize like, oh, you shouldn't have wrote these things. This is super revealing. Right. And he's like, I know. That's who I am. That's
what he's doing. That's what he's looking for.
As an artist.
And then you can see that that's how he was able to get that out of other actors. Exactly. Is that he was constantly doing that himself. It's funny. It's really interesting thing to hear, right? Like, what's the progenitor of that kind of behavior in people? And I think some people, like we've talked about, Duza and some of the, Joaquin Phoenix, some of these self-taught people that have some ability to naturally explore and almost excoriate themselves and pull apart the layers and really look in and try and tinker around with their own inner workings, right? But like in this instance, it sounds like Kazan already, I'm sure he was an incredibly talented person, but then to have this experience with this psychoanalyst and to have that also even be this extra thing, it's like, oh, you can see how people affect each other, right? I mean, amazing that something like that could get him to then make On the Waterfront, right? And then you think about how then, I mean, I don't, this might be an apocryphal story, but I was told to understand that then Arthur Miller, in response to On the Waterfront, wrote A View from the Bridge, right? And we got these amazing pieces of artwork out of people just having some curiosity about themselves.
Dude, that play...
It's fantastic.
Is phenomenal. And the last line from Alfieri in that play, my teacher, Jim, we analyzed that play when he was teaching script analysis. And that was the play that we analyzed as a group. It was the first play that I didn't even know what analysis was.
It's a doozy to start with script analysis.
And it took us a month.
Yeah.
So we would meet twice a week, 3-hour sessions. And as a group, there's 15 of us or something. We analyzed it one day per week. So it was 3 hours at a time. We would go through 3 pages.
Wow.
3 pages in 3 hours.
Yeah.
It was taking.
You can do that with a play like that.
Yeah. You can. And obviously he was looking at the historical context, and part of the analysis process he was teaching and that I learned and that I now teach is really dive into the artist, really dive into the playwright.
Yes.
Because like you said, that's really important, and Arthur Miller kind of famously said, he wanted to see what other artists made of his work, which is why he didn't write novels.
Right.
And Sidney Lumet was kind of talking about that in his book, Making Movies. He was like, why didn't you just you're such a good writer.
Yeah.
He's like, because I want to see what the set designer does. I want to see what the director does. I want to see what the actors do. And his, I always say, because Jim Carrey said this and it just like light bulb, but it was art is an outer molding of your inner life. And I loved that because, like you said, that was kind of your first foray into acting. You were like, what's my inner life?
Yeah.
My outer molding is this character, these lines, the blocking. But how do I make a piece of art? Like, how do I make something that moves someone? Not the laughter, but also not the indicating only.
Yeah.
How do I feel that? And playwrights, novelists, poets aren't different than actors.
Yeah.
It's if they're really trying to create something that's worth reading or has value or it's something... It's an offering of some kind.
Yeah.
A View from the Bridge, that last line from Alfieri. Alfieri, I kind of read into it because Arthur Miller, it seems like the names of his characters were never accidental.
No.
And his name starts with an A. He's narrating it. He's got this blend between the legal counsel, but also the historical
and the
understanding.
And the Greek chorus of it all,
yes.
right? Yeah.
And I think that's Arthur Miller. I think that's how he would, he goes to Salem and dives into the history and out comes the Crucible. But it was the witch hunt, which was kind of interesting him, which at the time was a thing. And so he was, that last line when it's Alfieri opening and closing the show and you hear him say about Eddie Carbone, Eddie, Ilya, maybe, Carbone, E-C-E-K, maybe. He said, and Eddie, it's a tragedy. Eddie wants his respect so badly that no one respects him at the end of the day.
I had never thought about that. Is such a good analysis. I love that too, because then you could really understand how if he's Alfieri, which he's all of the characters, right? But if he's Alfieri, right, then it's a character who is deeply observant, is entrenched in justice, right? He has a strong sense of justice.
Absolutely.
But is ultimately and recognizes he has no capacity to change anything, which is, I'm sure, how he felt, that he was like, I just watched this disaster happen, and not only do I watch it happen, but it's like, it's predictable. It's Greek. It's like, it's a recursion. I'm just going to watch it happen over and over again. That's a really good, I like that a lot.
Right before Eddie comes on stage, he says, every now and then there's that case that comes along and you have to sit back and watch it run its bloody course.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying. And it's that awareness and that powerlessness that I think encompasses that character. And like you said, the sense of justice, he comes in at the end and says, I think even though obviously he disagrees with Eddie's actions, and of course he tried to counsel him away from what he did, he said, I think I'll like him a little more than my sensible clients because he made himself wholly known.
Yeah.
And that's what Kazan did on the stand.
Yeah.
And with the op-ed, he said, this is me, man.
Right.
This was me then. This is me now.
Yeah.
And this is what I think we should all do.
Yeah.
And even though everybody pushed him aside, he said, I don't care. That's who I am. And that's why he said the movies after that testimony are worth watching, because it's really me going, I don't care. Like you said, I want people to really understand me.
Yeah.
He was saying, I don't care.
Yeah.
And when you watch On the Waterfront, Terry Malloy at the end goes, I'm glad I did what I did. The Omerta Code going against, you can't speak out. He goes to the stand and says, you know what? For once and for all, I'm going to do something that's right.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm glad I did it. And what happens? He takes a beating on the behalf of others.
Yeah.
And Kazan for a long time was like, that has nothing to do with my life.
Right.
And then he gets into this interview and he's like, it has everything to do with me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's what's amazing about art. And that's such a great, I think, seminal lesson right there in those two pieces of art.
Yeah.
Which is they're both making outer moldings of their inner lives.
Yes.
But they're doing it in such a way where just for who they were and at the time, such high quality movies, plays.
Yeah.
It's to me, that's one of this kind of standard bearers of things, whether it's theater or cinema. It's like, I would like to, on whatever scale, I don't care. I want to make something that has that effect where I'm saying that's what I want to say, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a good thing. I try and keep in mind. It's hard to, because it's easy to look at things like that, or Sidney Lumet, Dog Day Afternoon again, and look at it and be like, this affects me so much. How did they make this? How did they do this? And it was an enormous amount of skill, an enormous amount of craft, an enormous amount of practice, an enormous amount of talent. But at the end of the day, it was also just curiosity in themselves, in the themes in their own life, and their grit and their courage to be willing to express those things, even past when they even think they were, right? Like, it's amazing to hear Kazan say, that has nothing to do with my life. Because I think that as an actor, that's like such a good lesson. I think like to whoever we're talking out there that's watching this, is like the things that you'll look back and go, that revealed so much about me. Those are the ones where you're going to learn so much about acting, but about yourself. I think the more that you reveal about yourself, which is that's the scary part. That's the part that's where we want to hide. But when you can reveal something about yourself, and not in an autobiographical way, which you wouldn't be able to do in a part anyways, because you can't change the lines to say, well, I was born in Plano and I went to a Christian school and none of those things would even mean anything to the audience. But if you can find a way to reveal what those things mean to you and how they've made you through the character, right? How you can bring those things to the character, not changing the character. And if you can even, like Kazan did, go past your knowledge of yourself about that and look back at it and go, oh my God, I didn't realize what I was revealing about myself. I think that's when we make things that actually impact people. I think that's how those things get made.
100%. And I think, have you ever read that book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
Oh, no. I know many of the quotes from it, but I've never read it.
It's so good. I finally read it. And I had been told to read it forever. And I was like, all right. I think my mom bought it for me, and I read it. And there's a quote in there I just will always remember, because it just felt so real and so true, which was, those with a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Mm-hmm. And he lived through Auschwitz, so he lived through Holocaust. And he said, as soon as someone hanging on to life with nothing, no nourishment, no nothing, but they had the hope of seeing their family again. As soon as that hope was dashed when they heard their family was dead, they died within a few hours.
Right.
And he was like, there's something here. And him being a psychologist himself, asking that question, why? Why did that happen so fast?
Right.
There was such resilience in humanity, and yet it's gone. And he said, there's something about meaning.
Yeah.
And it connected with me as an actor, because when I was learning acting in a real way, we learned how to do things with reality through the independent activity.
Right.
And the activity breaks down into 3 elements. Whatever you're doing has to be difficult, urgent, and meaningful. And I remember going, why? And it was like, because everything we do has has an inherent meaning. Even if I'm just drinking some water, it's because I'm thirsty. Yeah. It's like, I put this on because I think it looks good, or it wasn't dirty, or whatever. There's a reason. And like I said, sometimes in plays and movies, the stakes are much higher than that. And the meaning is much greater.
Yeah.
But there is meaning in the things that we're doing, even if we can't quite define it.
Yes.
And training yourself to physically, emotionally, imaginatively embody those activities and those things, it then obviously translates dramatically to, I'm not just tying my shoe in the scene, I'm trying to get this guy to like be on my side so we can trick him and rob the place, or whatever. If it's like Glengarry Glen Ross.
Absolutely. It's always, that's when you were talking earlier about like humans are always doing something. They're always, and I think it's the trick is figuring out they're always revealing something. Humans are always revealing something about themselves, even when we're hiding, even when we're avoiding. Those are some of the most revelatory things you can do, but like you said, just drinking a cup of water, my mom can be unbelievably revelatory of her emotional state by just the way she does the dishes. And I know, and I'll be responsive to it. Just hearing the way it'll clang, or, oh my God, I can get emotional thinking about if it's especially quiet, or if we're talking and then she just goes off and does that thing, right? It's so effective to us. We can't help but, and then we can't, in response, our reaction can't help but be revelatory. And that's how you can read a scene sometimes and you go, well, where did this come from? How did this reaction happen? Or where did this transition come from? That these scenes can be so difficult sometimes because you're going on the page, nothing helps me make sense of why this just happened. But in your own life, you've seen people or experienced yourself, like I just talked about, you can say, hey mom, what's going on with this thing? And it's kind of a fraught subject, but if anybody were to listen, they would just think you're talking about a house or dad or whatever. And then she goes and does the dishes. While she responds, oh, he's fine, but something has changed the way she's doing it, or even just the way she looks away. We're so sensitive to those things. I think that's increasingly, and so hard nowadays I guess it's always hard. I have to remind myself it's always been hard because I'm like, what with social media? But as if it wasn't hard, like during the Vietnam War or World War I or like any of these other times people were doing incredible acting. But I think having sensitivity as an actor is to being sensitive to the ways you're reacting, to the ways I'm reacting to things, to the ways I'm when I reveal something, how I respond. That's like, to me, so much the meat of where I find things in my acting. I think where we all find things in our acting is what we're sensitive to, and not just sensitive like emotionally, right? Like, how is my body responding to this? Am I getting hot about this thing? Does that thing make me feel cold? Do I feel small when somebody says something? I think it's a really hard thing to hold on to because, like I said, it's always the case, but so much of our culture now feels like it's about figuring out how to deaden ourselves or figuring out how to be tough about something, or even we're more accepting of emotion today, I think, than we have been in the past. But it's sort of a perfunctory emotion a lot of times. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like you're sad, you cry, or you're angry, whereas that's not always how we want to respond to things. And it's not always emotional, right? Sometimes it's about your behavior too. I mean, look at the behavior people take when they have a response. Look at all the things we just talked about with Kazan and Arthur Miller. So that's one of the things I am constantly struggling with, is how to have the sensitivity to things, but then also not be overwhelmed by them. It's really tough.
It's a double-edged sword, honestly, to be in any sort of artistic or creative field. My buddy of mine once, we were in the same acting class. We were texting about something, and he was going through a breakup. And he was such a talented actor, and he had such an amazing imagination and such great creative instincts. And so he texted me, and he was like thinking of his ex. He was like, I think she's hanging out with that guy. And he was texting me. He was like, sorry, dude, I just had to vent. He was like, expressed how frustrated he was, because he was like, I know we broke up and it needs to be, but I just feel so, I miss her and this and that. And he said, God, the imagination is such a double-edged sword.
Oh my gosh.
He's like, I've just gone through 5 fantasies in my airplane seat.
Yeah.
I'm freaking out. This is so good for my acting.
Yeah.
But it's so bad for me right now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh man, I think every creative person or anyone with an imagination, it really is. And because if you're using your imagination for something good, then it's so good. But in those moments in life when you're kind of very sensitive to something, or you can sit there and just, wow, where did I just go? I just went into so many disaster directions.
Yeah.
What's the reality? My mentor one time a mentor of mine said, hey, where's the war? And I would be like, here, what? And he's
Yeah.
like, you're just sitting in a chair,
Right.
talking to a guy. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh.
But there is always a sort of a war with this. It's both, right? That's the trouble with any art form, but especially with acting, is that it is just sitting in the chair and talking to somebody, but it also, there is some war going on within you. And we want to hope that you can bring that to the character in some way, that you can bring, that you can, not even just the character, that you have the courage to bring it onto the stage.
Absolutely.
Right? Whatever thing is going on within you, because that's again where it becomes tempting to wear the mask and go, oh, I have this thing going on over here in my life, but that's not going to make it up onto the stage.
Right.
It's like, well, how is it not going to make it up onto the stage? You're still you. You're still you up there.
Oh yeah.
It's still going to be going on.
Though when I finally got, remember I told you before the podcast started that I had reached that point where I was like, well, technically I'm now an actor because I'm making money as an actor.
Yeah.
But secretly, privately, I suck. What do I do about that? And it was like, go back to class, I guess. And I'd been in New York for like 5 years or something at that point, and I was like, I'm not going back. I'm acting. I don't, but I tried to find, anyway, I found the class. Once I was almost through that class, we actually staged the play Waiting for Lefty.
Oh yeah.
And I got to play Dr. Benjamin. And, sort of the final scene that's climactic that leads into ultimately the strike within that union, of course, written in 1935 during the Great Depression.
Right.
And
Amazing.
Famously resonated with the audience where
then they actually went out and struck.
And everybody was like, and you'd love hearing that story because it's just so, that's the penultimate example of the audience responding the way that Odette's or the playwright or the wanted them to, if only they would feel the desire to strike with what the actors have done on stage and the way that it's done. But I had this one particular night, my mother came to the show. It was kind of an interactive show where the union was in the audience.
Oh, cool.
And so it was in an old church in Brooklyn. And so you file into the pews and then people would be there and they would be, period appropriate and kind of in the union meeting, really stressed, broke, hungry, tired, can't feed their kids. And all the actors, of course, were a part of this program. And so they were really working out their own struggle, their own battle. Yeah. And on one particular night, because the powerlessness that my character feels through the bureaucracy and the BS, and Dr. Barnes can't help me, even though people are dying and I'm a doctor, I'm supposed to help them.
Right,
and he's like, no. And I end up, of course, being a part of the union and then striking. But I came off stage that particular night, and the blocking was I come off the stage and I sit in the pew, and then I'm a part of the union. But I was crying as I was helping the doctor down, the older doctor, and I sat in the pew away from everybody. And I don't have any lines, but I'm in the union now. I've transitioned into this union space. And I was sitting at the pew and I was just crying. And now there was a new scene. And so now the context was kind of different for me, that I was crying over the loss of my purpose. Right. And that I can't really, so what is there to do? Probably strike if they've really killed Lefty. Yeah. And my mom, we go to dinner at the end of the show. The whole night she's looking at me and she's like, you're not okay. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? And she's like, I know you, you're not okay. And I was like, why are you saying that? She's like, I saw you, you're upset. And I said, Mom, you've finally seen me act well. And I think it's confusing you. That entire night, she was never convinced that I was okay. Wow. I said, I'm doing a play in Brooklyn. My family's here. My friends are in the show. It's the best thing. I'm living the dream right now. I love it. Yeah. You're not okay. I know my son. You're not okay. I know my son. And it was funny because in the deep recesses of my mind, probably in reflection later, I was like, well, I was working from something that I didn't feel okay about. I had to access the powerlessness in my own life to do justice to that scene, to that potential moment. And it struck me in the way that it struck me that night. I didn't cry every night or whatever, but it just happened. And I thought, wow, this is really uncomfortable. I don't want my mom to think I'm hiding something from her, but I also don't want to tell her that there's a powerlessness I feel about things. And maybe that'll hurt her feeling. I don't know. She'll feel, well, maybe I did something wrong. And And it's like, that's that tension between the desire to communicate and the desire to hide.
That's such a good, that's a great story. I think because it's like, I'm just thinking, like, yeah, as you were describing it, I was like, of course there's so many things you feel powerless about, like you're you're an actor. Let's start with that one.
Yeah.
Absolutely powerless.
Absolutely.
You're an actor, you're in study, you're a student, your sense of growth and ability is based entirely on like what you're able to get then. You're doing, you're doing a play in Brooklyn. It is a dream, but it's also like, is this really what, like, there's so many ways it could be that. But that's the thing is that we do have all of those things every single day. We deal with those things. It's just that to get through the day, have all these wonderful little workarounds that are actually a form of our creativity, right? That we can turn the noise down on that, turn the levels down on that powerlessness. And so then when you interact in the way with your mom you normally would, right? She'll just go, oh, well, that's Adam. That's just Adam. That's how he's normally acting. But yeah, when you turn the volume up on it, that people can go, oh my God, I didn't know that was going on inside of you. And then when you do it really well, and I'm sure it's probably what happened, they'll start to go, I didn't know that was going on inside of me. I think Strasberg, right, because it's the teacher I study with is a Strasberg method teacher. He learned under Strasberg, and he always talks about how Strasberg would say, I'm much more interested in Pavlov than I am in Freud, right? Because we're so Pavlovian. And we want to think there's more to it than that. And sure, we have free will and we're not just dogs that respond to bells and salivate. But I actually kind of love that metaphor that we are the dogs that salivate in some ways, because when you see a dog salivating, you think it's hungry, right? And so when you get a script, like this is increasingly how I try and think about it. It's like, okay, in some part of the script, it's going to say you need to be hungry. And so you can indicate hunger, or you can sharpen your fork and knife, and it's an indication that maybe, or get your bib ready, your napkin, or you can lick your chops, right? Or you can think about being hungry, right? Or maybe you've learned some things and you go, oh, I'll think about that delicious dinner I had that one time, and like that might do something. That might be pretty good. But what we're really looking for is, what's the bell that makes you salivate autonomously? So you don't have to. That's what you're talking about. When your imagination is really working, you don't even realize it's working, and you don't have control over it with your friend, right? That's that double-edged sword of it just goes. And what's wonderful is when you have a performance or you do a rehearsal, like you talked about with your mom seeing it, where you'll ring that bell for yourself and it makes you salivate. And someone in the audience won't just salivate. They'll hear that same bell ringing. They'll hear their own version of the bell, right? This is all metaphorical, of course, but they'll watch it and not just go, oh, Adam's sad about something. How touching that your mom probably thought, this makes me think of my little boy, right? This reminds me that I'm a mother, like these roles have changed. He's older, he's grown up, he's in New York, but then she could see you like that, and it could bring back some memory for her. That's when we're really doing something wonderful, I think. And for as pretentious as a talk about acting that's like an hour long can be, because sometimes the pretense just makes me want to die.
It's true.
It can be so pretentious.
It's true.
But when it's really good, it's not.
I know.
It's not, when it's really good, it's not pretentious to talk about it, because we are excavating something meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something obviously so meaningful in art. Outside of acting.
Yes.
Think of, anything, music, poetry.
Absolutely.
There's so much meaning there. And I think there's some recognition of pattern, of meaning of something when we watch something that's real, or we connect with something, we recognize something, like you said, not only in what we're watching, but in ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's usually all great art is self-revelatory, or just revelatory. And it makes you understand something that you didn't before, hopefully revealing another layer of truth of existence of something. And if it doesn't do that, it's probably not art. And and then it can really become pretentious fast. But I think if we can, I think it was Ethan Hawke talking about the fact that sometimes he did like a TED talk during like the pandemic or whatever. And he was talking about how, art is silly and foolish or whatever to many until you're going through something. Right. And when you lose someone you love, you hear that song and you feel less alone. Yeah. And that's what Arthur Miller said. He said that I see the theater as a serious business, one that should make man feel less alone. Yeah. And going back really quick, because I wanted to say this about what you said about you're sort of always working from the subterranean thing and how to get that out.
Yeah.
Because that was really the first, I guess, artistic challenge you had set forth within yourself.
Yeah.
Kazan said something so good in that book, Master Director Discusses His Films, where he was talking about just breaking down scenes. And he said the best scenes have the action going one way and the emotions going another way. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And a lot of directors will talk about the subtext. I'm directing the subtext of the scene. You know, and you as the actor are going, there's something underneath.
Right.
And we're all kind of working there, but it all comes back to the acting principles that really clicked for me. Something like an ounce of behavior is worth a pound of words. It's what you said about your mom at the sink.
Yeah. Oh
and you're
my
going,
gosh. Yeah.
she's revealing a lot.
Yeah.
She's saying nothing.
Yeah.
It's how she's doing what she's doing is revealing the character.
Yeah.
And if we can find a way to not only access those things within ourselves, but like you said, almost subconsciously set up for it to respond to what's going on.
Yes.
You're really doing something instinctive. And that, again, last thing I guess I'll say about Kazan, probably not, is he said like his job was, I want to get the actor to be instinctively responding to the role without being too cognizant of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And a lot of, I remember reading that as a young actor and a young director and going, and he said, you'll see a lot of directors that aren't super effective will carry the script around or a clipboard, or they'll just talk to you a lot between takes. And he was like, they think directing is talking.
Yeah. Of
just
course.
like acting is not saying lines.
Yeah.
It's like he said the best directed film would be one where I didn't say a word.
Wow.
Because I set the values up for them to just almost automatically happen.
Yeah.
Whether it's like department heads or a cast or of course the script matters a lot.
That would help. Yeah.
And so I think it's us trying to find a way to balance, like you said, a codified, simplified approach, but do it in a way that feels so natural.
Yes.
And that can be the mystery and the difficulty of it.
Yeah, I mean, like I think of, I don't know if it was Strasberg that said this. Again, this is the method, but it's really any application of acting is, he would say the method is really a way of translating what a director is telling you. Because they'll say, you need to cry here, right? Or I need the audience to feel this. And it's like, okay, well, good luck. I would love to. I'll tell them then that they need to applaud. I'll tell them then that they need to be sad. And it's like, or you can just be sad, or maybe you have some way to make yourself cry, or some way to make yourself laugh, or some way to make, but that's really not what they're trying to get you to do either. What they really mean is, I want to believe something and be affected in some way by you doing that thing at that time. And so that, again, that really dovetails with what we were talking about earlier, right? Like this sense of imagination and how our imaginations are so strong. You can't slow them down when they're really happening that way, right? And how do you do that consciously, right? We have to consciously get our unconscious to do something. And that's the part it's so maddening, you know. I think it's An Actor Prepares, Stanislavski talks about how it's like you have to approach your unconscious obliquely, right? You have to come from the side, because we are like an engineer who's consciously constructing like a water wheel, but really we're not making the effort. We're not doing the thing. Our ego isn't the one creating the energy from that water. It's the river, right? The unconscious is that river of imaginative energy, but you can't just go sit in it. That doesn't do anything. And you can't stop it. You can't dam it up. Then it's just a lake, right? You have to find a way to sneak in there and get some of the energy. It's the craziest thing, because it's yourself.
It's wild.
But you have to like sneak in there and like fool yourself into doing the thing. And that's the other thing I was just thinking about, is there's a great talk Strasberg gives where he's talking about the difference between the imaginative, the creative artist and the interpretive artist, and how it's easy to think of acting as an interpretive art, because we are given a script and anybody can say these words. So really, it would be easy to say that the breadth of the art is really just each different person's interpretation of those words and saying them. A little inflection here, a little bit of this, a little bit of emotional, range, whatever. But he had the contention that it was an actually creative art. And so this interviewer was like, well, how do you distinguish those two things? And how would that be the case? And his point was, like, I think one of the things I remember so well about it is that creative art is something that happens at a moment of inspiration, right? And that in all these other art forms, which are totally applicable, and as actors we should infuse as much in our lives as we can, because we're seeing other artists deal with the same struggles we have. But the one distinction that acting has is that while a painter can have a moment of inspiration when they wake up, Salvador Dali can wake up in the morning and immediately start painting. He can have that flash of inspiration happen during his dream. Or, Mozart could have a flash of inspiration doing whatever and then just start making his concerto. We have to have it, if it's good, in order for it to be creative, in order for it not just to be an interpretation. It has to happen on the stage at that moment. And that's, to me, that's the part that has to be unconscious. And that's, I'm sure, what your mom was responding to, is when it's really unconscious and it's really happening in that moment, it almost creates creativity in other people, right? And that's also, I think, the most challenging part. I think you're lucky if you get one of those moments, one moment of that in a whole play, one moment of that in your entire career, maybe. But where oh my gosh, there's a fantastic conversation with Rod Steiger I just listened to, and he's talking about, they're amazing. And he's like, the breadth and the way he's talking about it is amazing. But he says, what was he working on? I can't remember the director, but for Marty, and he was saying, well, what are you going to do in this scene? How the director was going, what are you going to do? I need to have it in words. I need it to be clear, walking around with a clipboard. Although I think this director was very good. I can't remember his name. He was going, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how it's going to happen. I know that I've got these lines. I know she's going to come in the door, but I don't know what I'm going to do when my mom walks in the door and says that thing to me. And then he says, and when it's really good, and when you have the courage to do that, then the audience can realize something about life at the same moment you do. And that's the scary part, but that's the fun part. I think that's when it's really thrilling, is in other art forms, they get to realize something about life and then transmute it into a medium and hope that we as it's all right. Is it fixed? They get to, they get to paint, they get to create an orchestra, they get to play an instrument and understand something about life when they do it. And then hope that the recipient, the audience, will have that same realization or some realization about life. But we have to have it happen at the same moment that they do. And that is what I think makes acting especially challenging. And I think it's what is worth talking about. But it's so hard because it so infrequently happens. I know for myself, I'm like, that's what I was talking about earlier, is like, it's still a struggle ever since I've been a kid to say, well, how do I get that to happen the entire time?
I know. And I've worked predominantly in independent film and theater. That's mostly, and now exclusively, where I work as an actor. Yeah. But even in that world, there were times when you're shooting something and that becomes that the directive is, I want to know every little thing. And the amount of control a director can have, it depends on who they are, obviously, as a creative, as a person. Yeah. That sometimes they can be very, for lack of a better word, like a puppeteer. Yeah. I want to know exactly the inflection. I want to know exactly how you're going to say it, or where you're going to stand, or how you're going to look. And when you say that, I don't know, like Rod Steiger, in any way, even sometimes then there's this head scratch of like, we're rehearsing it. And I'm like, that's not how I view rehearsal. Yeah. I'm trying to experiment here and see what's going to work. Is the choice I made in the privacy of my own thoughts going to show up for me or not? Yeah. And like Paul Thomas Anderson talked about writing this way, but he said, I put myself in a position for something to happen.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh. But again, there's the vulnerability of it not happening.
And also not having it be the thing you want to have happen, or it doesn't happen in the way you hope other people will see you having it happen. Yeah. And the more personal it is, the more you have an expectation probably of how you want it to be carried out.
Definitely. And I've had a buddy who was talking to me about how when he was shooting a season of a show, he was like, I'm very excited about this role, and there's actually some depth to it.
Yeah.
And even though it's on TV and this and that, it's like, it's really interesting. And it was like, it's really interesting to watch the episodes back because they cut out every interesting choice or take there might have been.
Yeah.
And over the seasons, it was like, they're deliberately making sure I don't do that. They're like, we have the formula.
Yeah.
We know what the audience wants. We need you to do it this exact way. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, we're going to be here for a long time and you're going to sit in more traffic. And like, he's like, okay, I'm going to look at it as like a service. It's my blue collar job. I'm going to do this and I'll do a play on the side. And like, I wanted to see too, like, what are your experiences with that in your own career?
That's great. Yeah. Cause I was just thinking like there's all the art of it, right? Which like we can clearly talk about endlessly, but then there's the commerce, right? And also understanding that, it can be both, or there can be something artful about commerce, right?
Definitely.
Or something commercial you're doing, and that you might be trying to do so much more with it than it really is or deserves to be, right? And that can be just as misguided as doing nothing, I think, or doing too little, right? And so that's been a real struggle. I think the struggle to be truthful and to be effective and to, act in an unconscious, imaginative way is difficult, but really it's all like a kind of a delight. It's fun. It's wonderful. It's challenging, but it's a wonderful challenge to deal with. The distinction between art and commerce for me has been quite a hard one. And I have to delineate those two things very clearly because no commercial enterprise promises you that it's going to fulfill you financially, emotionally, artistically, all these. We put so many expectations on it. And it's like, it's not going to do all those things. There's no job you're going to get that's going to make you suddenly feel like you're the greatest actor ever, pay for all of your meals, buy you a house, get your career to advance, get you an agent, win you an Oscar. Those things don't exist, right? The industry is actually based on the idea that all of those things exist, and it sells millions of people that dream every single year, but they don't. And it's hard to bifurcate those two desires, because wouldn't it be the dream to be working on something where you're working at the absolute edge of your creative capacity and growing and getting paid to do it? And maybe every once in a while that happens, but more often than not, it's a commercial endeavor. And I've worked, my bread and butter has been in a lot of sitcoms, which is wonderful. It's not something I ever wanted to work on. I used to watch sitcoms as a kid and be like, this is crap. This looks like the most fake staged thing. People are laughing. There's an audience laughing at it. They've put in these canned laughter.
Right.
But even in that, there's more you can do with it than you think. Yes, there is a formula to the way that they're doing these things. And part of the reason for that is because, all the questions we're asking, all those things you're talking about that your friend dealt with, my girlfriend, I just had 4 fantasies about how all these terrible things are going on. Or I asked this question and my mom starts to think something's wrong with me, right? Or it makes me question my own sense of power or whatever. In actual everyday life, that's miserable. People are trying their hardest to avoid that feeling. And then we're asking them to come and do it and be like, no, think about these things, feel miserable, and so a lot of commercial forms of acting and entertainment are ways that they figured out how to make it more an ease of entry for people. And maybe if you're lucky, you'll have a moment where there's some revelation or catharsis that happens. But more often than not, it's to ameliorate people, or it can still be artful even if it's acting. You know, my teacher always talks about how it's art if somebody goes to some, you know, if you see a streetcar named Desire and it's a wonderful performance and they leave going, my God, I never thought I would relate to a monster like Stanley Kowalski, but something about this performance tonight made me think I might do something monstrous like that to defend my family. It makes me question myself or my intentions, or makes me question my sensitivity for a character like Blanche, right? And it gets you to stop and change your life or your outlook. But the truth is, it really can be just as much art to watch an episode of I Love Lucy, or I wouldn't maybe say this about Fuller House, which I was on, but a sitcom, something that's kitschy and commercial. But if somebody watches that and they have a CAT scan the next day, or they're getting screened for cancer or something, and they're terrified, or they've just lost a family member or something like that, and they watch one of those shows and they forget about that and they laugh, that is just as artful.
Absolutely.
It really can be. Yeah. And so I think what can be difficult about it is we want to think about these high-minded things and do this high-minded stuff, but just doing the formulaic stuff can feel false sometimes when we're really, when I'm really in my studying my acting, it can feel false to just do something that's formulaic. But it's like, no, that's what's needed for living truthfully in the imaginary circumstances. The imaginary circumstances of Law and Order SVU is that they always find the bad guy. Mm-hmm. And usually by minute 38, you know who it is. And, and those are real things because people won't watch it otherwise. Mm-hmm. Challenge the status quo in your own work that you create, right? But mm-hmm. if it's there, then it's finding, small ways to do it. And like your friend said, it's so funny. Like every time he did anything real, they cut it out. It doesn't mean you shouldn't still do that mm-hmm. because you never know when they might want to use something that's mm-hmm. real. But yeah, I mean, for myself, like working in sitcoms, they talk about how there's laugh lines, 3/4 of the way down a page, generally there's a joke. They write it that way because a huge amount of the structure of sitcoms is around table reads. Each day you do table reads and there's 20 writers there because they have a writer's room. And so you have to know half of this is about the presentation that's for the cameras. Well, a third of it's the presentation for the cameras, a third of it's the presentation for the studio audience, and about a third of it's the presentation for the writers, in the studio and the network. So the pages of the actual script are formatted in a way where the lines and the jokes are easy to recognize. Network executives will know, okay, they're going to laugh 3/4 of the way down on this page, generally. So that's how writers will write it. And it's ease of use and it's ease of the environment that you're in. And so if you try and buck that trend or you try and fight that, it's like you're fighting City Hall. You have to be in the groove of the thing. And it's funny, like my teacher makes this, has a great sort of analogy about this sort of a thing, because we can think that all acting is supposed to be like universally naturalistic or realistic, or it's, like, okay, when you see somebody doing a procedural cop, show or a sitcom or a really broad single camera comedy, right? That you're like, well, that's not real. It's not realistic. It's not, but it's truthful in the imaginary circumstances of the show or of the piece of mm-hmm. media you're doing. And he makes this analogy that he'll talk about how so many people hate Dick Van Dyke's accent in Mary Poppins. They're like, oh yeah, his physical comedy is great, all these things, but he's got the worst accent. And he'll say, no, it's the perfect accent for a man who dances with cartoon penguins. Right?
Yeah.
It's like we'll get so selective about the things that we find false. We'll get so mm-hmm. selective about the things that broach our sense of believability within something. But it's like, more often than not, that's revealing how you're out. Oh, my shirt's so unbuttoned. It's revealing something. It's revealing something. It's revealing something
Literally.
about how you're not really, you're fighting what the author, the playwright, or the script, or, the writer's room executive has given you.
And you need to be aware of, and this is part of just the professional, but also the creative aspect of being an actor, is you need to know the form within which we're creating. Because sometimes, if you come in acting as if it's Dog Day Afternoon and it's Fuller House, it's like, it's gonna be, it's not like if Al Pacino came in and was like, Attica, you'd be you're fired.
Well, actually, the Attica scene might be pretty good.
That one would work.
It'd be pretty broad. Yeah, the scene was like, cause she's got a great ass.
Yeah,
that wouldn't work on that. That might not. That exact line wouldn't work on Fuller House. But that size, of performance
exactly. You have to know the vehicle. You have to know the form.
Yeah,
and even the best of playwrights who work mostly in realism, like Arthur Miller, even talked about that a lot. And something like Skin of Our Teeth versus An View from the Bridge versus, something even more, even just like David Ives or something that's even absurdist. It's like, I need to know the medium within which I'm creating.
Right.
And I think that's part of the service of that story. You watch Pacino and Dick Tracy or something. It's like, that's a very different movie than Reds.
Yeah.
Same guy.
Yeah.
But totally different style for a reason.
Yeah.
Even if you look at Scarface, like that's operatic.
Yeah.
It's
insane.
Huge.
Yeah.
And yet when you watch it, you realize, oh, it's sort of like a modern American version of Shakespeare in a sense.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we needed to see things augmented in a way where we get what Brian De Palma's trying to go for here.
Yeah, he'd have to be that big when he's at the end of the movie. If he's reading that script and at the end of the movie he goes, okay, I snort a mountain of cocaine and then say hello to my little friend and then kill like 400 SWAT guys and then fall and die in a splashing puddle of blood, you'd be like, okay, this is going to be big.
Yeah.
This is going to be a big performance. I'm going to be like cockroach and say all those things. You cockroach. He's so good in that movie. He's so big. You would see that, and if you saw him do that
as Michael Corleone in The Godfather.
Yeah, if you saw him do what he did in Scarface in The Godfather, you'd be like, what the hell is he doing?
This guy's terrible.
This is the worst actor I've ever seen in my life.
Suiting right, the character, the choices, everything that you do to the material, to the style, to the form.
Yeah.
And I think that's like I feel like that's with more time and experience, you get that. I think younger actors or people that are just new to it, it's hard to even wrap your head around that, because you're like, and I think that was my foray into acting, was watching Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
I watched him in the same week. I watched him in Capote, and then I watched him in Along Came Polly, and I couldn't believe it was the same person. And I literally was like, how did he do that? And that was kind of what made me want to pursue it even with more seriousness. But if he was flipped his approach, it would have been bad.
But he is amazing in both of those.
He's so good.
And it you can see, I mean, just like with Pacino, you can see how you're like, okay, somebody who's willing to say great ass is also going to be willing to, first of all, take a movie in the 1970s about having a transgender wife who he's robbing a bank for, which was really controversial at the time, but he's willing to take both of those risks. And then he's willing to take the risk to make the phone call the way he does. That's so affecting. And same with Philip Seymour Hoffman. You can watch him in Along Came Polly and see that he's the guy who's willing to drink the pizza grease, which is like amazing. And then you can see him in Capote and be like, oh my God, well, I can see why he's willing to take the risks he's willing to. They're smaller. They suit the size of the form that he's on. They're more subdued and naturalistic, but they're really just as risky for the form that he's in. And he's willing to do that consistently. And I think that's because he was just really endlessly curious about himself, and also kind of like Kazan, like endlessly honest, like was willing to just be like, this is me. It's one of the hardest things, because I think, again, like we get into acting, I think I got into it, I know, as a kid, because it's like I could play another character. We've talked about this basically the entire time, getting to play someone else other than you and getting to distance yourself from the most sensitive parts of your own nature. But then the closer you can get to just being like, this is really who I am, the better it is. And I don't think someone like Philip Seymour Hoffman, I don't think he could ever hide who he was. He wasn't smooth. He didn't fit into the world easily. That's why even in like Boogie Nights, he's amazing. You know, he can be like heartbreaking and hilarious when he's like, Derek, I got the same car as you. I got the same jacket as you. And it's like heartbreaking.
It is, man.
But he's hilarious.
I know.
And that's because I think he was willing to be like, I'm kind of like this in real life.
Yeah. Yeah. We touched on this, I think, last time a little bit, but it was like he asked the hard questions eventually. He said in an interview, he was like, eventually I have to just ask myself the questions that we're asking about the character.
Yeah.
And, you know, the things about Truman Capote that he was exploring, like I'm asking, his desire and his need to be loved led to so many things. And he was like, here we go again.
Yeah.
All right. What's my relationship with that?
Yeah.
You know? And he said that was time and time again what he eventually would get to.
Yeah. Yeah. My teacher was Philip Seymour Hoffman's teacher as well, actually.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing. And he's not one to like really talk about the people he taught. He doesn't have he doesn't have a website where the actors' names are in stars. That's not really his thing, but he will occasionally bring up sort of instrumental or didactic stories about something he's done with one of these actors, not so that he can, you know, bring up somebody famous, but so that it can be like, look, we've all seen this thing, and so you can understand the challenge. Right. And he talked about, you know, to your point, because we're talking about sort of the challenge of doing something commercial, and how that's different than just endlessly exploring your art. And he was saying, you know, when Philip Seymour Hoffman brought him the script for Capote, he was like, I don't know what to do with this, because it's the character, nothing actually happens. There's not some big action at the end. The criminal he's interviewing gets executed, I think. But that's really the only thing. The rest of it's all just interviews with this person. So what makes the drama? What makes the conflict? What's being revealed? And so my teacher was saying, well, you have to know exactly where he's at emotionally, because it's all an internal struggle. It's all this internal thing that's going on. You have to know exactly where you're at on each page. And he said, you have to know that because they're going to break the script up. You're going to shoot all the scenes in the jail, right, where he's interviewing the murderer. You're going to shoot all those scenes in like 1 week, but they happen in all the different places. And from scene to scene in that jail cell, months have transpired. And he's written some of the books since then and thought about how he feels about this person and all those sorts of things. So he had to know exactly where he was, arcing that full performance in a play. You have the benefit of it taking you through the full thing. The emotional journey is contiguous. So you really just have to be in the groove of the material, is like really just follow the actions and the things. You still have to arc and you still have to craft. Right. But you know where you're going because you just had the previous moment leading you there. Yeah. Whereas having something that's on film is often broken up into all these different parts, and even said it got more challenging because they needed to go back. They lost their light on a day, and so they had to do reshoots. And he was saying, this was Philip Seymour Hoffman saying, I don't remember where I was that day. And they want me to recreate, they want me to redo the same thing I did that day before. And he goes, you know, what I did that day had to do with not only all these things I had done previously and the way I had put this character together and the way I had done all these things in the script, which I've completely forgotten now. But not only that, but it also had to do with what I did that day. I woke up that day and I did something. I was affected by what was going on set and what was going on with this actor and how many days we had left on the shoot and the worry about what's going to happen when I'm done with this job. Will I have another one? All those things have changed now. So how do they expect me to give the same performance? Yeah.
And it all comes back to that Meisner quote where he said, every moment has a meaning all its own. Yeah. How am I going to recreate that I can't. if we physically can't, but technically we have to get somewhere in that zone. And creatively and technically, how do we do it?
Yeah.
And that it really is the mystery and the challenge that is before us every day.
Yeah.
With whatever project we have. But man, we could talk for hours.
I know.
This is so great. Adam, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Adam.
And giving us our time. To this camera, let people know where they can find you online.
Mostly just on Instagram at Hagenbuch, at Hagenboo. Should probably branch out. Where are you? Tell the camera where you're.
I'm going to tell the camera. We're on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anytown Actors Lab. But this particular podcast obviously is called In the Moment with Adam Lowder. So like and subscribe, guys, for more episodes, and follow us on other platforms if you haven't already done so. Thank you so much for joining us. Man, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is awesome.
It was awesome. Yeah.